This is Teaching for Student Success. I'm Stephen Robbineau. Today, my guest is Dr. Tracie Marcella Addy, Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning and the Director of the Center for the Integration of Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. In this episode, we will discuss why instructors and institutions should embrace inclusive practices. We also discuss practices that have been demonstrated to improve engagement, persistence, and success. Wherever you are on your journey of providing the best learning environments and opportunities for all of your students, listen to this episode for new perspectives, support, motivation, ideas, and possibly a new book to add to your book club or journal club. I'm excited that Dr. Addy has joined me today. Welcome, Tracie. Thank you for joining us on Teaching for Student Success.
It's a pleasure to be here today.
I'm excited to have you. Before we dig into your book, let's discuss a few things. First, on your CV, which is quite impressive, something unique piqued my interest. On your campus at Lafayette College, you served as a student quarantine buddy in the spring of this year. I've never seen that before. Can you tell me about that program, your responsibilities, and the experience?
Sure, absolutely. So for that particular program, we were volunteers, and some of the students, had to go into quarantine or isolation. And we wanted to make sure they didn't feel completely isolated and also that they had the things that they needed. So our responsibility was basically to check in with the students. We could call them, email them, just check in to see how they're doing, also how they're overall doing and how they're feeling too. And then, kind of be their buddy in that way. So we would keep checking in on them and telling them that we were a resource available. And at the end of their quarantine or their isolation, they basically leave. And then we'd kind of cycle through students in that way because there were so many going into quarantine and isolation. So it was a really nice experience. I will say that, some of the students would say, oh, no, I don't feel bad at all, even if they had symptoms or they were sick or whatever. And some of them were, just saying, I have everything met. Or some of them were saying, well, thank you. Or some of them would just ask me lots of different questions, like, where can I get this? Or what can I do with this? And I could connect them to those that they should be connected to. So that was my role as a quarantine buddy.
Nice. So it sounds like a number of faculty, or was it faculty and staff, faculty, anyone on campus who participated in this?
They mostly asked staff. There could have been some faculty too, though, that participated in it, but it was mostly staff.
And how many students did you buddy during the spring, do you think, ballpark?
So if I estimated, I'd probably say maybe about 15 or so. Yeah, 15 or so students. We were split up, across several people. So there was a bunch of volunteers. That's
an interesting program. So I've talked to a number of people during COVID, and no one has talked. Well, I hadn't seen evidence of a program like this, so it's interesting to hear about. Yeah. So now this is an interesting program that was developed, COVID generated, or COVID, whatever the right term is. There must have been some positive aspects for the students, obviously because of COVID, but this sort of program would be positive for students in non-COVID times, don't you think? I mean, is there any discussion about continuing a program like this into the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this program was mostly through the Student Affairs Division of our institution, and it was very intentional because students had expressed being isolated and whatnot during that time period.
Sure.
I think it's a good opportunity to try to think about, are there other opportunities for this as well? The nice thing is more of us are seeing each other on campus, and less people are being isolated and in quarantine. So that's nice. But I think it's a good point to make. These types of programs can have benefits outside of circumstances like COVID as well. I think it would be good for some students. I will say some students were, oh, I don't need to be checked in on, so maybe it could be also potentially a voluntary, kind of basis as well, because some students will feel like, oh, this is really great, wonderful. And some might be like, I'm okay. But I think intentionally checking in on students, whether it's this type of program or in teaching and learning environments, right? That this is a good thing in general to show that we care and we want to know how our students are doing.
Right. It's a really interesting innovation. And it's super interesting to think about. Everybody has done different things during COVID and implemented new practices, many of which might be worth considering moving forward, even as we move out of the COVID phase into the COVID vaccine available period, whatever this is going to mean. I mean, it's a new period we're moving into. And even after that, as you said, it just provides an interesting way to connect with students. Lots of students need connections on campus, and just helps them feel more connected and more seen.
Yeah, definitely.
More involved. Interesting. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. That just sounded super interesting. Now let's talk about your book, What Inclusive Instructors Do, Principles and Practices for Excellence in College Teaching. Perhaps we should start with a definition. How do you define inclusive teaching?
This is a great question. And it's a question we explored in the book itself. So that's actually something that we asked the participants of the study. What does inclusive teaching mean to you? So I'll frame it as what came back to us. Essentially, when instructors had thought about inclusive teaching, they thought about it in two ways. So one is the equity piece, that we're designing learning environments that support all learners, diversity of the learners. It's responsive to those who are in the classrooms that we teach, right, or in the learning spaces in which we teach. It's equitable with regards to instruction. The second component, they also felt that students are included and they feel a sense of belonging and it's welcoming. So inclusive teaching is facilitating not only this equitable environment for all students, but it's also allowing students to feel a sense of the community, that they're part of it, that they're not excluded, that it's built for them in mind as well. So those are two big pieces of inclusion that we parse out. It's really hard to parse out the equity and the belonging pieces, but, with regards to inclusion, because they're so related. When things are equitable, they can be more inclusive. When things are more inclusive, they're typically more, they can be more equitable for the group that's there.
Maybe you mentioned it, maybe we should talk just briefly about the study that you did. Who did you collect data from? Can you tell us a little bit about that study that really becomes the foundation for much of the work in this book?
Sure, yes. We basically tried to do a national study. We tried to throw it out there in a lot of different groups, instructors primarily being our audience, instructors across disciplines, across institution types, across ranks. And we basically wanted them to be able to participate in the study. So we distributed it to a variety of different institutions, to a variety of organizations. So you'll see, like in the study, if you look at the published paper, that it's mostly across the United States, right? So mostly US-based study. And there are different types of institutions involved, from research-intensive institutions to baccalaureate colleges, to minority serving institutions, historically Black colleges and universities, community colleges. They're all there. The voices of those instructors are represented. So we essentially wanted to hear from everyone. We wanted to hear from all different types of institutions, all disciplines as well represented, and to tell us a little bit more about what is this inclusive instruction that you do. And then a number of other questions like the barriers, the challenges, what types of supports and whatnot. So we asked a variety of questions in that particular survey.
Did you target specific faculty, or were you just broadcasting out and people were self-identifying as inclusive instructors?
Yeah, we broadcasted it out, but we can identify by the survey design if they were inclusive, because they would be able to describe inclusive teaching practices that they engaged in. So we did ask those specific questions. There were some respondents that said, I don't know what inclusive teaching is. I don't know if I use it, so those would be the ones that were still at the uncertain phase at that point. And this study was conducted before the COVID pandemic got big. But the great thing about it is the results still live, right? This is something that we'll continue to reflect on in years and years. It doesn't have to depend on a pandemic and increased awareness. Now we're seeing certainly that there is increased awareness and desire to make change because of that increased awareness and accountability. But this data, it's stable. It's timeless, I think, in a lot of ways. Some of it is timeless.
Yeah. So what do you think is driving the increased awareness among the faculty?
So COVID-19 really, and I see this at my institution too, because, our Centers for Teaching and Learning played a huge role in a lot of institutions around moving institutions onto faculty and courses online. And so we're at a school where all of our classes mostly were essentially in person. So we had to move completely online. And as a result, one of the big things that happened, there's a couple, it's also tied to our social political climate right now, but the move online also introduced a lot of awareness of the challenges that our students face. So some students not having access to certain things in technology and being revealed that if they were just at the college, you might not have ever seen that unless, they told you or expressed it in some way. So we saw into the lives of our students a little more and the struggles that some of them had due to differential opportunities and differential privilege that certain students with advantaged backgrounds had, disadvantaged backgrounds did not. So that increased awareness was really profound for many instructors, and they wanted to do something, about it, and they had to grapple with that. And they're very surprised, I think, by a lot of the things they saw that they had not realized about their students. The second thing, of course, is all of the events happening in our nation, the injustices, George Floyd's murder, all of that tied to what's happening in our Black communities, et cetera. So all of that tied to it, even other communities as well, and racism happening. So all of that, I think, led to a very dynamic situation, an urgency more, an awareness where people wanted to do more. They see more. Now it's time to actually do more. We also are in a generation, I think now, especially, with all of what's happened, that has been helpful, but also the students of today, they definitely have a lot of spirit around these issues and a lot of thought and, so activism and whatnot around this. So I think also we have to think about this generation also, this is important, and it's being important for beyond the current college age generation, but that's also there as well. So I think it's like a perfect storm of many different factors, some of them obviously of which are very unfortunate, but it also has propelled individuals to move forward with inclusive instruction and designing more inclusive environments.
Yeah, that's interesting. This sort of collision of all these events coming at once that's generated, as you said, this perfect storm. Terrible, but also great that we can move things forward in the classroom. So let's talk about the problem. Define what inclusive teaching is, and maybe you can talk about your motivation for writing the book. But let me just ask a few questions about the problem. What is the problem? What's the evidence that there is a problem in the higher education system? If we're going to do something, what's the motivation to do that? What's the failure of the current system, or what failure of the current system does inclusive teaching address and hope to solve?
So if we look at our populations of students that are going to college now, it's more diverse than it ever was. And that's because more students are having opportunities to go to college. And one of the challenges of that is that institutions have not necessarily been built with diversity in mind, like the historic nature of how the institution's built, who made the decisions about it, how people who had privilege to go to these institutions, who has access to resources before, so that they can actually get to the institution. So all of that has been something that I think a lot of institutions are grappling with. There are some institutions, such as historically Black colleges, universities, community colleges, where they're completely designed from the beginning to be accessible or to support students from certain identities to be able to go to school and have access to higher education. And so what a lot of other institutions, especially like predominantly white institutions, are having to do now is, now that their populations are becoming more diverse, more first-gen students of various identities and backgrounds, and seeing that some of them are not succeeding in terms of retaining at the institution, feeling belonging at the institution, and not even potentially coming to the institution, right? Like matriculating or trying to enroll or apply to the institution. So they're seeing that this is a problem and seeing it in certain fields even more than others as well. So the problem is we have systems in place where they might not support the types of students that we want, and we want them to succeed at our institutions. So we need to think about, what do we do now? So how do we backtrack here and try to make sure that those structures and resources and supports are basically in place, and also that students will want to come to our institutions. So that is a lot of the problem. There's been a lot of exclusion that's happened, and now we're trying to figure out how do we promote more inclusion now that we're allowing other students are having more opportunities to go to school, diverse backgrounds.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a critically important issue that you're really addressing here. So let's talk about evidence for a second. Is there evidence, or what is the evidence that inclusive teaching increases the retention rate or the persistence rate? Maybe we can talk about the opportunity gap or the equity gap. What's the evidence that inclusive teaching diminishes the equity gap?
Mm-hmm. So inclusive teaching involves a lot of different types of teaching behaviors. And if we look at the research, certain types of studies have really honed in on trying to answer that question. So there's been studies, and they also intersect with the psychology. So we're seeing things across different disciplines to really think about belonging, issues of belonging, as well as tied to academics and performance and retention and all of that. But we also seen some studies that look at different techniques and tools in inclusive teaching, active learning being one. Active learning, if it's done well, being able to reduce those gaps that we see between groups who have been historically excluded from higher education, and they can improve as a result. They can do better as a result of different strategies in teaching that are used, such as active learning methods. And that's seen a lot. And, various studies in STEM education have definitely shown that. So we're at the point now, I think, where active learning is pretty accepted as an important practice, and we can include it in our inclusive teaching framework. Also, when we look at some of the studies around belonging, we'll see like some studies that do self-reports of different identity groups, first-gen students, students of color, etc. And they might look and ask students to report their sense of belonging related to their community and their institution. And they'll also look at other factors like their achievement, how they're doing, their persistence, and things of that nature. And we'll see in those studies broadly that the students who are reporting more belonging, there's a relationship with their achievement, their mental health as well. And they've done some interesting studies in psychological sciences too, where they've actually done interventions where belonging is used as a psychological lever, and they track those students, and they see the students kind of affirm that they will be able to develop these networks of support at their institution, that they're actually doing better, right? They do better academically and achievement-wise, as well as their mental health. So there's been a lot of interesting work around, I would say, belonging and looking at achievement, belonging, looking at mental health and well-being. There's been a lot of interesting work about some specific teaching strategies like in active learning and reducing those gaps. And I think that's a lot of what's going on right now. And I feel that there's going to be more around this as we continue to explore all of the different strategies now and increased awareness that people have now, especially instructors in higher education, wanting to actually do more research around this. It's very promising. There's evidence that we really need to think about belonging. We really need to think about the teaching strategies and how we can reduce those equity gaps that we see.
Thank you. Yeah. And this is really how you open your book. And let me say, your book really documents and references a lot of these studies that you've just mentioned. They're all documented in your book and reference. So it's a great resource really for also finding primary literature that refers to these papers. If anybody's interested, it's great. It's really good. So that's how you open the book. You really open the book talking about why do we need to do this? One of the reasons I've started this podcast was to help people figure out how to do things. And one of the things that your book really does quite effectively and clearly is lays out things people should do. Part 2 of your book really is all about what does one do? How does one design an inclusive course? What are the things you can do? And what I like in there, and maybe we can talk about some of these, are things that people can do that really aren't hard to implement. Some of them are very basic and straightforward. And I like where you start. You start by talking about the syllabus. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the syllabus and how the syllabus can become a tool, a very important tool to promote and develop an inclusive teaching environment.
Sure. So when I think of the syllabus, I think of just the general framework of the course and the design of the course as well, and the messaging that we give to students around the course. And so, yes, in our book, we did talk about the syllabus to really hone in on it because it is at that level of design of a course and making it more inclusive. So some of the things to consider in the syllabus is first, just basic things like the tone of your syllabus. Is it inviting? If you read it, do you really want students to take your course? Do they feel invited into the course itself? Is it more of a contractual agreement, or is there some inviting language? So we talk about the language of the syllabus and the tone and how you can actually make it more warm and student kind of friendly in a lot of ways. Use language such as growth mindset language, include various types of resources on the syllabus, just making sure students are aware of what's available to them and normalizing it. So for example, tutoring or other support resources, making that evident that students have those supports, that you also support their engagement in that and that you want them to succeed. So tying in that mindset of a growth mindset, but also with all the tools that they have in the class and beyond as the instructor at the institution to succeed. So including those is also very important. We can also in the syllabus give some aspects of how we view or our philosophies around teaching, around the classroom environment. So we'll also see in syllabi that we value all members of the community. That type of language is also going to set up a more welcoming environment for students. In addition, when we think of the syllabus, we can think of the design of the course and how, if it's very intentional, it can build inclusion. So we talk a little bit about resonant materials, thinking about your course and who's taking it, who's in my class, knowing who's there, and ensuring that some of that material will resonate with your students, that they can see themselves in their material or they can access portions of themselves through that material. So what does that look like? You might have to teach certain content or concepts, but you can also create assignments that allow students to have choice and indicate that on the syllabus so that they have that agency to incorporate aspects of themselves in those particular assignments. We can think about the content of the course too, and how that can make it more resonant with students and, make changes in that way. In addition to just the content of the course, we can think about the practices we use to assess students, how we've set up the structure of the course. For example, if it's a course for first year students and it's a high stakes test type of environment, is there a way you can lower the weight of it? Let the students have time to practice. We have to think about ways in which we can also incorporate places where students can have more chances, more feedback, and actually they're also kind of learning the course, but they also have to learn the material. But we don't want to make sure we're assessing students just because they know how to take a test. We want them to be able to show and illustrate they know the content, they've developed the skills. So if it's their first time taking a test, let's give them some time to practice. So those are certain things we can think about. We can also think about more formative types of assessments over the high stakes assessments. What are also ways that we can help students see where they're at, where they're standing in a class, that are not always high stakes, that maybe they might not be graded, and just various informal things that we can incorporate in the class, in the design phase of that class very early on, that will help students have chance for practice, will help students have chance for feedback before more high stakes types of things. Now, there's a lot of other pathways to take with inclusion with regards to designing a course. Some will also venture into other areas like ungrading and things of that nature, but we're focusing more on the learning, and we're going to focus more on these formative types of feedback and processes and activities to help the students build their knowledge and to learn in several of the different types of ungrading kind of practices, although they take many different forms. So there's, much to do with, I think, the design, the syllabus of a course, also leaving opportunities for students to invite content that they want to talk about in the course. So there's a lot of things we can do there, but those are just a few.
Yeah, it's a big discussion of the syllabus and the importance of it. And I think I think it's a great way to open this section because I think, as you point out in that chapter, this is really how students often first interact with the course.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing they might do before they even come to class is to open the syllabus and look at it. And so providing a welcoming document as opposed to one that is only a contract. You talk about this notion of being a contract or a communication tool or an organizational plan. And I think in the end, it probably a well-designed syllabus probably does all of those things because it serves many purposes.
Absolutely.
But providing a tone and a structure that doesn't frighten students, that doesn't intimidate them, but instead welcomes and excites them about coming into your course so that when they first walk in the class and maybe see you for the first time, they already feel a sense that you've welcomed them into your realm, right? Because you're really bringing students into your world. They don't know what that is. They don't know what they're walking into. Super interesting. Since you mentioned these things, I'll mention a couple. There is an earlier episode with Susan Bloom talking about ungrading. So we've had one, and we'll have more discussions about ungrading, so people can refer to that. And also episode 3 was Bill Davis talked about some interventions in his syllabus that he did some really interesting studies showing that a very simple intervention in syllabus was able to significantly impact the equity gap. So the syllabus is a very important tool to pay attention to. And I think at some level, very low stakes, you're not asking people to do different things in their course on a daily basis. If all you did was attend to your syllabus, you can have a significant impact on students that come to you. So I think that's a great place to start. You then spend a lot of section talking about making students feel welcome. It's a really interesting section. You talk about on the first day of class, building community. One tool you talk about is a tool called the Value Relevance Affirmation Statement. This is by Saltarelli in 2017 and Kazalchek as well, 2017. You refer to a few papers. Can you describe what a value relevance affirmation is and the positive impacts that it has? Again, something very simple that seems to have a big impact on persistence and completion rates and grades.
A lot of times when values affirmations are done, it's basically before something high stakes, like a test or something like that. And it's very simple with regards to what the students do. They're basically just asked to think about what they value and to write it down. And essentially that's it. And so they've definitely had a lot of really interesting results from those types of interventions where they do see differences in the equity gap, students actually performing much better when they have a chance to reflect on what they value before that particular assessment. So it is a really promising tool that has definitely evidence behind it.
Yeah, it's really interesting that such a simple exercise has positive impacts. Fascinating. You sort of follow that by talking about the professor memoir as a way of a professor to sort of share out, introduce themselves and talk about who they are. But it also seems to me to tie into the value affirmation statement that it's really a way for a faculty to say, hey, here's who I am and here's what's important to me, and to share that with the class. This comes from Hollander in 2001 and is talked about in your book. Could you perhaps provide an example of what a professor memoir might sound like?
That's good. Some of our professors, and I guess I can talk about Khadijah here because she's one of my co-authors. One thing that she does in her classes is she just shows her students her career journey and path, and everybody's been connected. So she'll display that on the screen and say, these are all the people that have been important to me in my life with regards to my path and my journey, and go over and talk about how each of them played a role in her path, and having her students be able to see that and hear where she got her encouragements, how that drove her. That would be one example of how a professor can share aspects of themselves. She talks about her path and journey in research, and especially as a Black woman navigating the sciences. It's very inspiring. It's very, very encouraging for students, and just to see her journey.
Right.
That would be one example, I would say, of a professor memoir. But they can look in so many different ways, depending on what the professor would like to share about themselves. Just thinking about what things would help my students, what things would make them also feel encouraged and just learn a little bit more about me and who I am. That can also help them. Some of our professors will also share about being first generation themselves, how they navigated college. That might also be in that memoir, or some of the challenges that they faced as learners. Some of them will say, oh, when I took this course, I didn't do so well, and now, look where I'm at now. And I, these are things that you can learn and grow in, having that growth mindset language. So sharing, various pieces like that of themselves and their paths and journeys, I think are a couple of ways that this happens.
Yeah, it seems great. It's a great way to express your humanity to your students and to help them see you as a person. And as you said, serve as a role model for your students. Mm-hmm. There's two other things I think I really want to hit on. You talk about a student information survey. Mm-hmm. This seems like an important way for the students to share with you so you can learn about them. You want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah. In general, instructors might want to know things about their students. Sometimes it might be things that are anonymous, and that's why we did the Who's in Class form that allows students an opportunity to share things that they might not feel comfortable sharing with every professor at the beginning of a course. And then other things, maybe their hobbies, what courses they take, things of that nature, their extracurriculars that might not be anonymous. The professor would just want to know. So the Who's in Class form is one tool that I'll draw out a little bit further since we've done some work on it and we use it at my institution as well. The Who's in Class form basically was co-created with students, staff, faculty to really allow students a chance to anonymously share aspects of their identities as well as their thoughts on inclusion and things that they grappled with in an inclusive environment, anything they wanted to share about that they felt the professor should know. This particular survey is typically given out early, right? It's the first class or prior, and the students complete it anonymously. The instructor can use that information to learn more about who's in my class, and they can actually make tweaks. So the whole goal was that they can make tweaks to their class if they know this information, right? And they can actually make it more inclusive for that class because every class is going to be a little different and students might share different information. So we ran studies on this form so that we could just understand and monitor how it was doing. The percent of completion, even though it's voluntary, we would see over 70% or higher response rates. Students were open to doing the form. A lot of different interesting responses on the form. We did ask students and their instructors who used it their feedback at the end of the semester on their instructor using the form. So the instructor was actually to work with the teaching center and to really think about what the students said on the form and how they would build a more inclusive classroom based on that information. So thinking of, we need these tools that give us information that support these inclusive environments to help us do it even better, right? So they would tweak it, they would have some plans and they'd put them in place. Then at the end of the semester, we asked the students in their classes as well as the professors what they thought of it. High percentages of students were comfortable with using the form. They appreciated that their professors did build more inclusive classrooms with the form. And the instructors felt similarly that they really would use it again. So having that information at the start is really going to help seed a more inclusive environment because sometimes it takes a while to get to know students. You have to be very intentional about it. We also see informal office hours and things like that, but this is a small step. Again, you mentioned small steps. It's a survey. You can send it out to a large class, a small class, right? Any size. You can look at the results and you can consider how to make changes, small changes. This is not going to be revising your whole course at this point, right? It's the beginning of the semester, right. But small changes. And some of the things that we saw the professors did in their courses, I can share a few of them. Maybe they have students of certain identity groups and they would actually incorporate different examples so that it would resonate, again, with more of the class in those particular identity groups. Sometimes it would be students had preferences for maybe writing versus typing or something like that. So they give more choice and opportunities to students, whereas they, wouldn't have before. A lot of the professors were surprised how many students work a lot of hours in their classes. So they would absolutely think about that with regards to when and how they structured in the assignments and what they expected of the students. Mm-hmm. Some students would say they're first gen. They'd also make sure all students had access to the first gen resources at the college. Some of the instructors might share that they are first gen, things like that. So those are the types of changes, the tweaks they're making to basically build these more inclusive settings.
Yeah, nice. So again, another tool, low stakes, very simple to employ to make a relationship between students and faculty.
Definitely, yep.
Yeah, very nice. Did you have any instructors that were resistant to do this, but did it anyway? And do you have some that you sort of dragged in, and did they come out the other end thinking this was a great idea?
For the tool itself?
For the tool itself, yeah.
We had one instructor, this is all, voluntary. We had one instructor who said they would do it. They used the tool, but that instructor complained about it and said, oh, this is pointless. This is a waste of my time. And so the one really interesting thing about that instructor, who genuinely, was very interested in building more inclusive classrooms and also just figuring out, how do I do it, grappling with these questions. At the end of the semester, we surveyed their students, and the instructor, we did too. The instructor gave it low ratings, even though overall it's really high, but this instructor was one of the few that said, oh, this wasn't helpful. So their students were actually of the most positive of the responses that we saw, where they really appreciated that this instructor, and I was just like, oh my goodness, when I looked at that data, I was thinking, oh my goodness, because actually when the instructor had these comments, it made me concerned. I'm like, oh, I'm wondering if their students are going to say that too. Will this align, right? Absolutely not. They were actually the highest scores of those particular classes. The students being appreciative
of the survey.
Yeah, doing the form. So the end of assessment was specifically commenting about your instructor using the form and implementing those strategies and things.
So the instructor who is on board with having an inclusive classroom implemented the form, then complained that the form was useless. And the students, of course, he or she, this faculty member didn't report that. They didn't report, thank you. They didn't report that to the students back. That was just an aside to you that this is useless. And then the students at the end of the semester, when reporting about the form, thought it was great.
Yeah.
And they gave you the most positive results.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And then how did that instructor respond to that?
Yeah.
Knowing that the students then found it extremely a positive intervention, did it change that instructor's perspective on the form?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I can't comment upon that. But what I can say is that I did tell the instructor this. But I don't know if that changed their mindset on the form now.
Interesting.
In general. But yeah, I can definitely say that. But one of the things that we think came out of that, how we can draw a conclusion, is that students, if they feel that you care, you're taking intentionality of trying to find out more about them, even if you don't think it's going to work or it works, it actually might have an impact on your students. That was very interesting finding there.
That's very interesting. And it's a great story to tell.
Yes, definitely.
That's great. You also, in this section, talk about essential office hours, which is an interesting concept. Can you describe that and say a little bit about essential office hours?
Sure. Yes. So essential office hours, which, people can call different things nowadays. It's basically inviting students to informal conversations with you. It's like a coffee hour, right, with students. And so a lot of instructors, especially in the COVID pandemic when it was starting and in trying to figure out ways to build relationships with students, especially in the remote environment, they started to just say virtually, come to my office hours before start of class or at some point during the semester, just to talk informally. That's it. There's no big agenda. We're not going to talk about the class necessarily or anything like that. I want to know more about you, your thoughts about the class. And so they'll spend that time and open up those times for students to be able to do that. Now, some do it voluntarily, but some do it essentially in a way that they ask all students at some point, come to my office hours. I want to talk to you. I want to meet with you. And I've definitely seen a lot of rewards of instructors doing that and reporting rewards of it, building these relationships with students. Some students commenting upon, oh my goodness, this was wonderful to be able to have the opportunity to talk to my professor outside of my own academics, to get to know me as a person and to spend that time and investment. So it's, again, another way that we can build these environments by building community with our students. So those are essentially what essential office hours are. And there's a lot of instructors that have adopted that, I think, since COVID.
Nice. So sort of implementations during COVID that may
persist beyond because of the positive benefits they have
Definitely.
for the relationships with students, which
Mm-hmm.
always result in better retention, better grades, better engagement. All those things are very positive.
And of course, just one thing to note
Sure.
is that, of course, for some courses, they're really big, right? So
Yeah.
it does take a lot of time for the essential office hours, but it is worth the investment by what the instructors all say. This is definitely worth it, but it is time intensive.
Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, we don't have time to cover your whole book. We could sit here and do this for a few more hours. You have things to do, and I don't think anybody wants to listen to me for that long. Mm-hmm. But just to sort of summarize this section, so conducting classes inclusively involves having a student-centered approach, things you talk about in the book, student-centered approach, growth mindset, accessibility to content, right? Have accessible content, and having diverse resources and valuing diverse student voices. And then being explicit in your intentions, where you talked about structured design, structured courses, but also providing flexibility, realizing that students have complicated lives and flexibility is needed sometimes. Perhaps one last question before we get to some personal issues. And how does providing students with an inclusive learning environment change the students? I'm particularly thinking about, what do they expect in following courses? So if they come into your course in a first year course and they take your highly inclusive course, what do they expect? And does it change how students interact and learn in courses that may be less inclusive? Not by intention, but some courses are different. That's all right.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know any studies on that, but from anecdotal and observation, the students are changed by their professors in the way they're taught. They're going to carry that experience with them into other places. So students will likely do some probably comparisons, right, between courses. So certain courses will stand out to them as being more inclusive, and those professors having impacts that are higher, I would say, in general, than compared to other courses. I think students take that with them. And seeing some of the feedback that I see also, I run several different programs around inclusion. Some of them are very deep dive type interactions, students partnering with faculty on their inclusive teaching efforts, observing feedback, all of this. And seeing some of what happens there can definitely say that the students who experience it are deeply appreciative of it, and that carries with them forward. They will probably be able to notice, though, obviously, that it's not happening, and when they do feel excluded in other environments. That's why it's important to have a culture of it. And so this gets into the cultural issue of, like, at an institution, we don't want them to go to one class and feel included in another class and feel excluded. That's clearly a problem. In general, I think something that we all need to kind of consider and work on.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's part 3 of your book. Part 3 of your book really is talking about making it part of the culture on campuses. Mm-hmm. This should happen in your class, in your colleagues' classes, across colleges, across departments. Mm-hmm. That's how you spend your last section of the book, which is an important read as well. I'd like to spend the rest of our time maybe talking about you a little bit, or some stories that you might have. I have in the past asked, what's your best and worst moments teaching, things like that. The worst moments, when I ask people about, turn out to be the most transformative moments in teaching, which I think sort of makes sense. You have something bad happens and it transforms what you do. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you have any transformative stories that you've experienced teaching or seen teaching, but maybe that you've experienced. So when you were giving your background earlier, I was wondering why you became an educator. I didn't know if you have educators in your family. Mm-hmm. Education became important to you, clearly. Mm-hmm. I didn't know if that would tie into a transformative story.
Sure. Yes, I'm actually from a family of educators, both my father and mother in K-12 education. My father taught special ed education in an urban setting where we grew up. Also, my mother spent time teaching mostly like in middle school, kind of settings. I have aunts and uncles and whatnot that are in education. So I do come from a family of a lot of Black educators, which is kind of exciting and neat.
It is.
And so with regards to transformative experiences, I will say that I think I've been transformed most by being able to be in different teaching and learning environments. As I mentioned earlier, being able to teach at a community college and a state institution Ivy League institution, private schools, all these different types, and seeing so many different types of learners. And just the beauty of that, I think, is very transformative. Some of my most memorable experiences were when I was kind of trying things out. I was an adjunct for a little bit before I got a full-time position. I recall one community college class, and that particular class that I taught at night, I will never forget that class. It was basically a class that was required. And so not everybody was like very excited about it. But one of the most powerful things is, most of these students, they had never seen a Black woman teach science. So that was one thing, right? They were all ages, all backgrounds. So it's really, a unique experience to have someone like me to be able to teach them, because it's not something that was grounded in the experiences that they had.
Right.
And I must say they were very respectful. The class went well. But I just remember forming such strong bonds with that class in particular. And even though they weren't science majors, they were very interested in it. They all had opportunities to talk about their experiences in science, build relationships in that way. At the end of that class, I felt really sad. I didn't want to end that magic, I guess, of that class. And I remember some of the students, they didn't want to leave the class, and I did kind of say bye, and then I had students contact me later and whatnot. So I will say that's very transformative, because teaching diverse groups of students, coming from somebody who is a person of color, who's had some interesting experiences, I would say, as a student and also as a faculty member, as, administrator, that's related to identity and things like that. But what's the most transformative is how any teacher, I think, and this is why it's transformative for me, any teacher can have such an impact on their students. So we can all play a role in this process and be able to really impact our students. And I see that across the board, wherever I am, and the students having these wonderful, gratifying experiences. So I'm very invested in teaching and learning. I'm very interested in what makes students learn, what makes them tick, what makes professors support students. And so I think my own experiences seeded that and continued that type of that interest that I developed early.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. From your intro, I'm not surprised that you came from a family of teachers. My mom was a special ed teacher in K through 12 as well.
Oh, nice.
Actually, K through 6, but she also did some adult education. I remember when I was a kid, in summers, she would have adult students in our house, adults who couldn't read.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's why I went into what I did.
Sure. That's wonderful.
Let me follow up your transformative story and see if we can focus on maybe one student that's impacted you. Do you have a most poignant moment for you with a specific student that you'd like to share?
Yeah, it's a unfortunate, sad story, but I had a story. It's very transformative though, of a student who was in my biology class. This student had cancer. They already knew they had cancer. They had it for several years. But the student had to go to get treatments. Chemo, was in the hospital at various points in the semester. The reason why this was so transformative is this student, the most lovely student imaginable. And the student would actually score the highest on the tests. And so she would be there for the tests and everything. And she would take it to the hospital when she had, times where she had to go, and she would be studying hard, and then come back. And, sometimes she would email me like, oh, I have chemo. I'm so sorry I can't make it. I'm like, absolutely. I totally understand. Like, please, get the treatment that you need. Come when you're able to come. She ended up doing super fabulous achievement wise in the class. Made a real big impact and when she was there, it was wonderful to have her there. She had, at that point, all of her hair was gone, etc. You could tell she had been treating for cancer. Unfortunately, the student, she did pass away a year or two later after I taught her, and I was able to go to her funeral, and I was able to meet her family. And so when I met her mother said, oh, you were her biology teacher. And she said biology was such a wonderful, like a big light to her. It was so wonderful and an important light to her. And that really touched me. And because I saw, that student loved the course. She was doing so well and she was trying so hard and she wanted to have a college experience, even though, she had the cancer and the treatments. And so that was very meaningful. And that's, again, another thing, another student, another story, another thing that I will never forget. That was pretty touching and amazing.
That's an amazing moment. I'm very sad.
Yeah, it's very sad.
To think of the joy you brought to her.
Yeah.
Through that trying time. So you helped her through that period.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You tell part of the story in your book, I believe.
Yeah, some of the scenarios arise from real teaching experiences like that we've had. Yes, that was definitely one of mine.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at the time. Tracie, I want to thank you so much for your time that you've spent with us, with me today. I look forward to your future work on inclusive teaching and helping faculty embed these practices in their courses with the goal of helping all students to be successful, particularly those that have been historically excluded and disenfranchised. In addition to this podcast, our website will provide a link to your website, to Dr. Addy's website, which is, you've got a great website. You've got a wonderful blog. I really encourage people to look at that. It's a great resource for inclusive teaching. And again, Tracie, thank you so much for our time. This has been I've really enjoyed our hour together.
Likewise.
It's been great to get to know you. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it as well. And thanks so much again for inviting me.
Absolutely.
For more information about Tracie Marcella Addy, her research and favorite books and papers, please go to our website, teachingforstudentsuccess.org. Thank you for spending time with us today. I hope you found this discussion interesting and helpful. Please share our podcast and website with your friends. I'd like to give a shout out to Lawrence Hobby. Lawrence is part of an NSF-funded research coordination network in undergraduate biology education that has recently started a journal club to discuss evidence-based teaching practices. What a great way to support colleagues in efforts to improve student success. We love hearing from our listeners. Please contact us through our website at teachingforstudentsuccess.org. Teaching for Student Success is a production of Teaching for Student Success Media. Let's end this podcast with some music by Julius H. Julius's music can be found on Pixabay.